Hi, I'm Warren Archer, founder of the Enlightened Success Path and the Instant Enlightenment Technique. So what is enlightenment? Well, it's very simple. Enlightenment is the end of suffering. When I talk about enlightened or enlightenment, when I use those words, I'm not referring to something magical or extraordinary. Enlightenment isn't about acquiring some superpower where your car no longer breaks down, or everyone suddenly starts saying how great you are. Enlightenment isn't just for a chosen few. It doesn't have to be something you search for all your life only to discover on your deathbed, moments before you say adios. It's available to you at any time you're open to it. It's ever present, but it is obscured by your attachment to the thoughts you're believing. Enlightenment isn't adding something. It's actually taking something away. And what you're left with is what's always there. I like referring to it as being extraordinarily ordinary. It's often overlooked because our expectations that tell us it should be something more than what it already is. I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about what you may have heard about enlightenment as a concept. Again, I'm talking about something practical, not something mystical. Using the word enlightenment or enlightened can lead to potentially murky waters. Some of you might feel uncomfortable with the word enlightenment. I say it potentially murky waters because enlightenment is a word loaded with a ton of baggage. For some of us, the word reminds us of cults and people in orange outfits with permanent smiles on their faces. It's as though anybody who uses that word is not open to reason, and it's best to let them be on their way. So there are many definitions of enlightenment. I wouldn't know where to begin or end if I were to try to count them all. Many of these definitions sound silly, childish, and extreme. Others sound rather grim. Because there are so many definitions, and because ultimately nobody can describe what enlightenment is, the definition of enlightenment offered by most teachers is intentionally vague and confusing. So with all these definitions, spiritual teachers have adopted new words such as awakening or liberation. However, ask them to define these new words and you're probably going to end up with more vague, contradictory, and confusing descriptions. I can only guess at the reasoning for this and say it's not so much that they're necessarily trying to be evasive, but that they don't want to limit the unlimited. The problem is that this approach causes continued confusion and frustration. To make matters worse, there's even more confusion surrounding the path to enlightenment. Some say there is no path. That's great, but without a pathless path technique, such as the Instant Enlightenment Technique, that I describe in my book, I Think Therefore I Lie, the pathless path teaching can lead to people giving up before they even start. That was pretty much what happened to me 3 decades ago when I was reading Krishnamurti. I didn't give up and stop seeking, but I was discouraged and even more distrustful of spiritual teachers and teachings. And there's the other extreme of spiritual teachers, the ones that say enlightenment takes years, decades, even lifetimes. I used to picture gurus in Himalayan caves renouncing every earthly possession and comfort only to get old and die, no more enlightened than when they started off. So what is the definition of enlightenment offered here? Well, it's very simple. As I said in the very beginning of the video, enlightenment is the end of suffering. There are many more definitions. Some are just as simple. Others are beautiful and eloquent. I go into these definitions in depth in my book, I Think Therefore I Lie. But to make it as beneficial and clear as possible to you, the ancient Buddhist definition of enlightenment being the end of suffering is the most effective. Why not go into more depth with the definition? Why not better describe enlightenment? Well, there are 2 reasons. Enlightenment isn't about adding something better to your life. It isn't improving on your situation or your personality. Enlightenment is actually loss. It's the loss of suffering, the loss of fear, the loss of anxiety, the loss of worry, the loss of guilt. Basically, the loss of psychological pain. And not only are there no true definitions, only pointers, this is the simplest definition and the most useful to you. The point here is not to try and create some belief or truth around the concept of enlightenment. And this is the key. The approach to everything with enlightened success is not to seek truth, but to offer what is useful to you at the present moment. And the ancient definition that says enlightenment is the end of suffering is both useful and highly practical. Think of enlightenment in terms of lightening the load, enlightenment. You're relieved of the weight you put on yourself as you shed fear, anxiety, worry, guilt, and all the manifestations of psychological pain. How does this feel? Well, imagine you're backing up in your driveway about to leave on a trip, a business trip. Now, you always look behind you when you back up, but for some reason today you didn't. Maybe it's because you couldn't find your keys and you had to run back and make sure the stove was off or something like that. Maybe you're running late enough to start feeling the squeezing noose around your chest. You hear an unmistakable thud. It wasn't your imagination. You hit something. You stop breathing as you have that sickening, sinking feeling that's pulling your heart into your stomach. The neighbors have toddlers. You've made a point of telling the neighbors to do a better job of watching out for them. And they pretended to care about your opinion. And now, well, none of that matters, does it? Nothing matters. Your life is over. You're not going to die, of course, but you might as well be dead. And with your jaw clamped so tightly it hurts, it takes an almost inhuman effort to get yourself out of your car. Once outside, you peek, but there's no view of the back of the car from this angle. Maybe you were thinking there would be blood and you wouldn't have to look any closer. You could take the car off and drive off a cliff and end it all right now. Yes, that would be better. Better than seeing an innocent toddler crushed under your car. You're forced to take a step, and there's still no view. Another step, another, and another. Now you're puzzled. There's nothing behind the car. And you realize right then that the reason there's nothing behind the car is because it's under the car. Your heart is pounding, and you look down, and you see shredded clothing, a lot of clothing, all over the place. Then you make out something gray. It's your suitcase. You'd put it behind the car and forgotten to place it in the trunk. Wow, never before in your life had you been so grateful for doing something so stupid. Your suitcase was brand new, and now it's destroyed, and though only a shirt was torn, most of the clothes you packed will need washing. Now, you're probably going to miss your flight, and that meeting was going to get you all that promotion you were hoping for, and you don't care. All the things that were so important in your life seem stupid, petty, and frankly pathetic. How could you have cared about those things? All you're feeling now is gratitude. Everything seems so beautiful to you. The colors so bright. You hear the birds chirping. Now, they've been chirping all along, only you hadn't noticed until just now how perfectly they sing. That's how it feels. A huge load has been lifted. You have been enlightened from your suffering. Are you feeling what I'm talking about here? Are you beginning to see enlightenment in a different context now? Enlightenment is not gaining, it's losing. It's losing suffering. You may say that taking drugs or drinking is enlightenment because you're not suffering. Well, that relief from suffering is the reason that people are attracted to drugs and alcohol, but it's not enlightenment. Cognitive function is diminished with drugs. The dulling of thinking and the process of thinking with drugs is what reduces the suffering. Enlightenment is clarity, not blindness. In the example of backing up your car, taking drugs would be like wearing a blindfold so you can't see what's happening. Whereas an enlightened perspective would be seeing what happened with clarity and without all the stories. You would see that your shirt is torn, your brand new suitcase is destroyed, and you would know that it's probable you might miss your flight. So you're clear about the situation, but there's no suffering. The feeling is gratitude. In that gratitude, you're completely present. This is how it works. Just like when you're doing something you love so much, time stands still. When you lose all suffering, you're lost in the moment. Can you recall a time when you were completely in the groove? Maybe you're driving a car with a person you loved. Maybe you're so engrossed in what you were doing, time just flew by. It's like when you're lost in the flow of the moment. Well, it's not just like it, it is it. It's when you're so present you completely lose track of time. There's just you doing this thing. It could be walking on the beach or in the forest or in nature. It could be performing on the stage. It could be knocking a baseball out of the field. It could be baking a cake or just lying on your bed. Sometimes days, weeks, or even months can go by and you have the sudden realization that you haven't had any fear, anxiety, worries, guilt, or sleepless nights. Suffering just slips away, and it was so simple and natural you hadn't even noticed. That's what it feels like. Okay, but that's great. How does this come about? Well, there are countless paths, including the pathless paths, such as the direct path and the instant enlightenment technique. They all lead to Rome. The question for you is, which is the most useful path for you at this moment? Now, the most efficient and immediate pathless path I know is the instant enlightenment technique. Obviously, I would say that because I came up with the technique. But there are people all over the world who have started to use it and experience its immediate effectiveness. In a nutshell, this technique involves using your thoughts as a tool, rather than being a tool getting used by your thoughts. I cover this technique thoroughly in my book, I Think Therefore I Lie, An Introduction to the Instant Enlightenment Technique. So, what do I mean by using thoughts as a tool? Well, you don't use a hammer to open a garage door. Is the hammer bad? No. It's just not useful when you want to open the garage door. For that, the garage door opener is useful. The hammer is not. Now, this can change at any moment. If you find yourself wanting to hang a frame, the hammer is useful. The difference with thoughts and hammers and nails is that thoughts come and go, and you have no control over what thoughts arise or when. But you can choose which thoughts are useful to you and where to direct your attention. This happens through a process where instead of resisting thoughts, so you resist the thoughts that you don't like, which if you've ever tried it, you know doesn't work. Instead of that, you simply determine if the thoughts serve you now or not. In a very practical sense, you reprogram your neural pathways to accept thoughts that serve you. Other thoughts may arise, but they have no power over you anymore. So how can you ignore a thought if it's true? Now that's a great question. If you believe it's true, then you won't be able to drop it because you'll be attached to that thought. The answer is that the instant enlightenment technique doesn't have you ignoring a thought. It's the opposite. A thought is examined closely and is seen in terms of its utility in the moment, not its validity. In this way, a thought is used as a tool. You don't spend a second brooding about so-called mistakes of the past or worrying about some imagined dark future. There's just action right now, moving you effortlessly and joyously towards your goal. The past and the future play their role as your focus doing your thing in the present. What's that role? Well, the past offers you all the things you've learned that help you do what you're doing now. The future offers you plans that give directions for your actions in the present. Without attachment to the stories, thoughts about the past and the future act as a tool at your service. Without attachment to stories, there simply is no suffering, and that's enlightenment. Leave your comments below and I'll actually respond. Click on the subscribe button and get videos on the Enlightened Success Path as soon as they become available. Thank you, and see you in the next video.